Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week's guest is someone with a lot of hats, with roles including being an editor at Boom Studios, heading up the KaBOOM and Boombox imprints, and co-creating and co-writing Lumberjanes. It's Shannon Watters. Thanks for joining the show, Shannon.
So happy to be here.
Like I said, you have a lot of hats, and I've talked to some editors elsewhere. Like I had James Lucas Jones from Oni Press on the show not that long ago.
Good old James.
He actually gave you some props on it. He was talking about how impressed he was by all the stuff you've done for licensing and everything. One of the things that
that's very high praise coming from James.
But one of the things that he talked about, that's something I never, either I never really heard of or never really thought of as far as what the role of an editor is casting projects, which so like figuring out the right fits for certain projects that are coming down the path. So for your day-to-day life at Boom, in your, like, with your many hats on, how much of your role fits into that category?
I think I would say that's probably it's obviously the most fun part of my job, but it's also, I would say, kind of, the day-to-day of an editor's job is essentially, being a producer on the project.
Sure.
That's what you act like, that's you, because you're doing the casting and you're doing all of the tiny little jobs that go into day-to-day of getting a book out on time. The casting, I would say, is maybe the most visible part of my job, the most influential part of my job.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, oh gosh, I don't know, I can't put a percentage on it, but large parts of my day are spent seeing what's out there and seeing who is doing good work right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that might not be true for other editors, but I would think that it would be. But a huge part of my job is kind of consuming what other people are putting out there.
Right.
I'm really lucky that I have the freedom to work with a lot of young artists and young creators who have not necessarily gotten their feet under them yet, and help them grow in their careers, whether it's odd jobs on a licensed project or what. It really, people do such incredible work for themselves, and it really is a pleasure to use kind of my place as a gatekeeper of sorts,
mm-hmm.
to bring their work to as many people as I can. So I would say, I'm not sure I can kind of a percentage of how much of my day-to-day is spent on that, but it's a significant part of my job, if not the most significant part of my job.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the things, actually, I wrote down, it's not really a formed question, but I was like, Shannon must read a crazy amount of comics. And I was like, segue that in somewhere. And I'm like, I think one of the interesting things, and I talked about how much I've been enjoying Boombox's stuff before we got on, but I looking through it, and you have people like, John Allison, and I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, but Tyson, is it Hesse or is it Hess? Hess. Like you have like John and Tyson both come from a webcomics background. And then you have someone like Alyssa Trayman, who I'd never actually experienced her work before. And she was like a crazy revelation. And she's coming from an animation background. And I think it's such a fascinating thing because, a lot of times, comics has kind of an Ouroboros type like thing going on, where it's like you hire people who are already working in comics, and that's just kind of what happens. But it seems like you're finding people outside the typical day-to-day comics world. Like web comics obviously are a huge part of comics, but it's not where everybody looks, and I think that's pretty cool. But I guess how much, like, is a ton of your job and like free time just spent like reading comics, not just because it's your job but also because it's your passion?
I think a ton of my free time is spent reading everything. Frankly, it's interesting. I'm kind of a voracious reader. I read really, really fast.
Right.
And it's my number one favorite thing, like outside activity to do. I'm not somebody who watches a lot of TV shows or sees a
Sure.
lot of movies, just because, and not that I don't love doing those things, I do, and there are obviously movies and television shows that I go and see and love a lot, but that's not, I'm not one of those people that has, seen every episode of Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad and all of the kind of the hot TV shows,
Sure.
because I'm reading all the time. I'm reading, and I'm reading trash. I'm reading long form nonfiction articles. I'm reading YA. That's a huge thing for me because I like knowing kind of what young people are reading.
Mm-hmm.
I like knowing the tones that they enjoy. And I'm reading comics. I'm reading somebody's journal comic. I'm reading zines. I'm reading mini comics. I'm reading graphic novels. The thing that I don't, it's funny, actually, the thing that I don't read a ton of, I was discussing this actually with Sierra Hahn, one of our senior editors, and Bryce Carlson, our managing editor, today, was that I don't read a lot of single issues in the big two. Like I almost never read DC or Marvel books.
Mm-hmm.
But everything else, I read a ton of, just because and I've been really lucky that I have, I have kind of an unorthodox when it comes to, I guess you would say, like mainstream comic publishers. I have an unorthodox taste and an unorthodox background for that. I didn't read a ton. I never read big two monthlies. That was never like part of my deal.
Mm-hmm.
James's praise is so high because the books that got me back into American comics in a big way, outside of just like Archie and Disney Adventures Zone, were the Oni Press books that were coming out in the early 2000s, late 90s. The Jamie Rich was editing, and James was obviously publishing. So my background is intensely indie comics and zines, and then web comics. When I was in college, the webcomic scene was kind of starting to explode.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my instinct. When I was in college, there was a lot of young people my age publishing their own webcomics and stuff. And I used to say about Vera Gospel and Jen Wang and Hope Larson, like, oh, if I had a comic book company, I would publish them.
Yeah.
Like, because I just couldn't believe that these people didn't have, that people weren't breaking down their doors to publish their stuff because they were doing such incredible work without the publisher. So that's my instinct, is to look there. And I've been really lucky that one of my first books that I edited from scratch, as an editor and not an assistant, at Boom, was Adventure Time. It was one of the books that I was given this assignment and said, do something with this.
Uh-huh.
And when I came to the table with Ryan North, my bosses, instead of being like, who the hell is this guy, which they kind of thought, because they didn't read webcomics, they trusted me. And they said, okay, if you think this is the best person for the job, go nuts. And that paid off, obviously, but I was really lucky that I was in a place where that kind of decision was trusted. And the decisions that I've made subsequently, in that vein, has been validated and trusted. So I read a lot.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that, you'd mentioned like, somebody like Jen Wang earlier, and like a comic that I really, really love from the past few years. God, it might have come out in like 2010. I don't even remember when it came out. Was Coco Be Good, which is it's such an incredible comic, but it's funny because I don't really see that much from Jen anymore. And it's like, but there was like aesthetic's not the right word, but there's kind of like a feel to that book that you don't see a whole lot in a lot of mainstream comics. And it like, not to overly simplify it, but like reading that book made me feel good. And that's one of the things I think is really underrated about a lot, especially the Boombox line, is that they're creator-owned comics that kind of I mean, I love images books as a line overall, but they're not exactly the most joyous reads you'd find
Mhm.
quite often. So reading a book like, Lumberjanes or Giant Days or Diesel, like you read that and I can never, like, one of the highest compliments I can pay a comic is when I finish the comic and I have a smile on my face. And
Mhm.
and like those books really do that for me. And it's I guess for you, like, do you I don't want to say that like the boombox line is like almost counter programming to what else we see out there, but is it important to you to find projects that give readers something, I don't know, a little different than what they've come to expect from comics?
Yeah, in a matter of speaking, it's lovely to hear that that is what you take away from Boombox because I always kind of classify that as like I'm trying to facilitate gleeful comics
Yeah.
and gleeful making because and not necessarily because I want to offer a counterpoint. So I think that Boombox has come to kind of epitomize that. But also, the thing, the the narratives that I enjoy reading are narratives that are like that feature people that are happy to be there and happy to be doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I just today actually, I recently finished a book today.
Of
My
course you
most
did.
recent of all ridiculous, ridiculous like reading a book in 2 days projects. Um, called Happy All the Time, and it's a it's a lovely little book about four friends essentially, and it's kind of a meditation on love.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody gets cancer, and nobody dies, nobody cheats on each other, nobody. And the author Laura Collins has an incredibly beautiful way of describing things, like a roast chicken or someone's character, or somebody sitting down to dinner. She has just a remarkable way of describing those things, and she has a remarkable way of describing the kind of the um, mundane emotions that we go through when falling in love and when caring for another person. And she makes them sound as extraordinary as they feel.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that kind of thing, that kind of exaltation in kind of the beauty of joy and surprise and happiness, and in the mundane parts of our relationships with each other, and the kindness that we show each other are really beautiful parts, like beautiful aspects of a narrative. And they're often dismissed as kind of fluffy and unimportant because there's so many the negative emotions are so much heavier,
Right.
and they have more weight, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the ones that merit the deep probing and the deep understanding. But it tends, for me, like I want to produce works that 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 kind of exalt in that emotion and those tiny kindnesses and those big kindnesses. The the conflict in a Lumberjanes book doesn't necessarily come from April messing up a mermaid music festival.
Mm-hmm.
When a young girl reads that, she knows that it's going to be okay one way or the other. It's fun to kind of take pleasure in something silly like that. But the meat of it, of course, is the fact that April has let her friends down. Like, she's let her ambition get away from her, and she's
Mm-hmm.
let her friends down. And and there's something lovely about that, and something lovely about the everyday, how we treat each other every day, and the relationships that we cultivate every day with the people around us. And so I tend to greenlight books that have that sensibility, and that take a similar pleasure in it. You know, Power Up is not a superhero book, really. It's a book about 4 people who are very different, who find out that they need each other and that they are a family, and you know, and Teen Dog's another great example.
Mm-hmm.
Which, you know, Teen Dog has got this like kind of jokey one note elevator pitch, which
Right.
is dog teenager. But it's one of the kindest, loveliest like books about friendship I've ever had the pleasure to read.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and it basically is about these young people and their relationships, and with this kind, gentle soul at the center of it.
Yeah.
Teen Dog, you know, and how that kindness and acceptance can change and enrich the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds so hippy-dippy.
No,
But
no.
it really does. I think it is the overwhelming force informing, I think, my choices as an editor always. You know, there's a lot of sadness in the world, and there are a lot of people telling beautiful stories about that sadness. And I want to let people know that life is going to be okay sometimes, I think.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's uh, even beyond like the kindness and everything. I think one of the things that I really appreciate, and you spoke to this, is like, you know, you read Giant Days, and it's a book that really, like, it doesn't have any like big, like there isn't monsters or anything like that. It really is just kind of a slice of college life with like some really, you know, vivacious and fun plotting that's going on between the 3 leads and everything. But one of the things that really stands out to me is it really just it really reminds me of people I would have known in college. And same with like Lumberjanes. Like I feel like, you know, while there's lots of crazy mystical things going on and stuff like that, everyone feels really down to earth. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's like the plot is never above the characters, and everyone feels like someone you could know, and no one is defined by any one aspect of themselves. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I like characters all over the place. There's a lot of characters that are organic, that feel authentic and everything like that. But it's just like, it's weird how rare it is to see, you know, like I don't know, like characters. I don't want to say characters that are defined by the mundane, but characters that just feel like people, as opposed to like, you know, parts of a giant mechanism for the story or something like that. And that sounds like I'm downplaying other comics. I really don't mean to be. It's just like I guess as a reader, it's nice having, in 2015, like, you know, we have you know, there's more comics being produced than ever, and there's just tons of great stuff that's being produced. But it's great having an avenue for me as a reader where I can go and I can just, you know, I can read something like you said, that has kindness to it, that also I don't know, kind of feels like I'm just reading about people living lives, even if it sometimes involves like uh, crazy battles between like Artemis and Apollo, or actually, no, it wasn't Artemis.
No, you were right. It is. It's Artemis.
Yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating because it's like, I don't know, like those are big things, but at the same time, it's like it never forgets about the fact that you know, these are just people too. And it's like, I don't know, I guess I don't really have a question there. It's just like it's just fascinating to me because it's weird that in an industry that's like, you know, a storytelling medium, that something like that can feel so rarefied.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like you truly, if you want to create a comic book, because comics is such an interesting medium, you know, we ask people to come back every month for 22 pages of content,
Right.
and to come back again and again, and to pay, you know, to lay, you know, $3 or $4 down and pay for the next installment of something,
Mm-hmm.
anything. What's interesting is that the comics that succeed and the comics that endure are not plot
Mm-hmm.
comics. They're not plot they're not plot driven books. The books that stick around are character driven books. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
look at, by all accounts, like, you know, somebody might be like, well, look at The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead, all that is a character.
Oh yeah,
Like,
totally.
the only reason, like, plot doesn't matter. You don't care. You don't care what's happening from week to week in The Walking Dead, really. You care about what those characters are up to in The Walking Dead. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if anything, superheroes are a case in point for this because, you know, God, who cares what Superman's been up to for 1,000,000 years? You care because Superman is Superman. You know,
Right.
you care because Batman is Batman and the Joker is the Joker. Like, character-driven narratives are like where the character comes before the plot or the comics that stick around.
Mm-hmm.
And so character is so important. The connection to that character, you know, you can have a book where the plot is slightly shaky, but if you have very strong characters, it doesn't matter. People will come back month after month to see what they're up to because they like them. They like spending time with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that you notice that because I think that I put a lot of emphasis on that.
Yeah.
When I'm looking and developing projects, looking for and developing projects.
Yeah. Well, in like, you know, talking about you know, the most popular, like like you said, like the most like long lasting and sustaining successes and stuff like in comics, like they are very much, you know, character focused. And if you look at like recent successes, like look at like you know, Smile by Raina Telgemeier. I mean, that's a book about
Exactly.
like, you know, teeth. Like it's about what happened, like, you know, like the embarrassment of like getting braces and like the stuff that goes on with your teeth
Mm-hmm.
as a kid. And like, you know, I read it for the first time when I was like 29 and I'm like some white dude in Alaska. But the funny thing is like because like it wasn't plot driven because like I could relate to the experiences of like
Yeah,
the embarrassment
exactly.
of like having retainers and bad teeth and stuff like that. I was like, man, that comics like really moved me. And it was in like
Yeah.
and like I loaned it to my coworker whose daughter like just did not like reading at all, and she was 10 and she like instantaneously became like Raina Telgemeier's like super fan number one.
Yeah.
And
No,
it,
that's exactly right.
yeah, it's just really cool because like I do think you hit the nail on the head. It's like the things that really sustain like the love of comics. It's like you can have all these different like events and big plots and stuff like that, but ultimately if you don't have the characters, like that's where the fans start moving away, and it doesn't matter what kind of comic you're talking about.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Well, and it's especially important, I feel like, in YA.
Yeah.
It's especially important to have those grounded characters in a YA. You know, I joke a lot. I use the Babysitters Club a lot as like a kind of example, a shining example, because it was very influential on me as a young reader, obviously, but also because it is a supreme example of kind of all of these principles for us, you know, for successful long-term not sequential, but like long-term serial storytelling for young people.
Hmm.
Because the girls in the Babysitters Club were just like you, and they were grounded in these like very specific ways. You know, like Claudia loved junk food, she loved art, and she was Asian American, and so you related to at least one of them, but more than that, they were aspirational.
Oh
Like
yeah.
you wanted
Hmm.
to see them, you wanted to spend time with them. These people were your friends, and you know, and it held up so beautifully. Over 100 books, you know, and something like 175 million copies
That's
are in
insane.
circulation, and it is because it didn't matter what the plot was. It never mattered, really, what the
Hmm.
plot was. You came back to spend time with those people. You came back because they felt like your friends. And, you know, despite, like, the fact that Batman would be a terrible friend, like, you want back. You want to come back and spend time with that character. You want to see what they're up to. You want to come back to it. And it is, you know, and plot kind of it comes, and you should always be obviously cognizant of your plot, but creating grounded and relatable characters should be any writer's number one principle, because they'll carry you.
Yeah.
They'll carry you through the rough times, the lean plot times. They'll be there for you. If you don't quite have a handle on a really solid plot, that's okay. You have a strong and grounded character, they'll carry you through.
Yeah. It's funny that you said the aspirational part, because it's like, I don't think people really think about that often, because it's like, in a weird way, like you said, Batman, and I just have to say it, a Batman thing. It's like when you compare Batman and Superman, it's like, like, not to completely derail the conversation, but like, when you compare the two of them, I think one of the biggest differences between the two is like, I feel like a person reading Batman feels like, I could be that if I wanted to, if I worked my ass off and like, had, of course, lots and lots of money. But like Superman, it's like, you can't be that. And so it's like, there's like a weird aspirational aspect to that. And I feel like aspirational, like having characters that, you in theory could see yourself in, is such an important part to comics. And even somebody like Batman.
Absolutely. But you bring up Superman. Superman was was an aspirational fantasy, for the Schusters. Like, it was, like it was immigrants writing a story about an immigrant who was the all-American immigrant,
right?
And it also, and it. We talk about this a lot. My coworker Daphne Plebin, who is also a supreme editor and an incredible story editor, far better than me. She would never let me say that, but it's true. We go to the gym and we have a 20-minute drive each way, and we talk about story the entire time. And comics are kind of, superheroes especially are these kind of masculine aspirations. They're masculine aspirational fantasies, which is why it's so fascinating to hear people talk about, like, oh, women don't read comics, as if women don't deserve, like, because superheroes are a very masculine, fantasy, and it's like, as if women don't deserve that power fantasy too, as if they don't deserve that aspirational fantasy as well. Putting out that's how storytelling has been for time eternal. And you're right, people don't really think about it, but it again is such a core tenet of successful storytelling, especially if you are if you're doing serial storytelling, because again, you are enticing people continually to come back. You have to. That's the nature of our business, and you can't entice people to come back with a good plot hook for too long. Right. You can get them for 4 weeks or 4 months or 8 months or even 12 months, but if you don't have, if there's not something that the characters see, or that the readers see in those characters that is real and aspirational, then you don't get them back.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah. Well, it, like the whole, like, I don't know, women reading comics angle, like, not that it's, a comic book, but it's funny that, like, people think that, women wouldn't want to read genre fiction when you think of something like The Hunger Games, when it's like, that's a giant success, not because people love triangles between, a badass, a dude who
the love triangle was nothing. Love triangle was nothing. It was like literally a non-event.
Yeah.
It was a non-starter.
Yeah, exactly.
And, don't even get me started. Hunger Games. But yeah, women deserve that power fantasy. They deserve somebody who is the Batman of women's genre fiction. That's what Katniss is. Katniss is dark, and she is cold, and she has one goal, and it is to survive.
Right.
And she can't help herself she wants to do the right thing, and she hates it. She hates that she wants to do the right thing, and it's deeply unpleasant to her that she has this moralistic streak, that she can't shake, but that's what Batman is essentially.
Yeah.
Like, that's all Batman is.
Yeah.
And it's so, it's not neat and tidy for a woman to be that way. And so the media, when they talk about the Hunger Games, they talk about it in terms of this love triangle. Who will she choose, Peeta or Gale? Who cares? Nobody cares. Katniss doesn't really care.
Yeah.
She cares a lot. She hates that she cares even a little bit.
Right.
And it's fascinating the way that the Hunger Games is talked about, because women do deserve these narratives. They deserve that power fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
They deserve that aspiration. There's more than one way to be a girl. That was a big thing when we were developing Lumberjanes, was that there there are all these, as Noelle Stevenson, obviously my close friend and co-creator, she said it best. She's like, in a movie there gets to be the good man and the bad man, the lazy man, and the funny man, and the crazy man, and women are just like the woman.
Right.
They just get the woman, and that's so unfair. That's so incredibly unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And with Lumberjanes, we wanted there to be all kinds of women in every corner of the universe. And anyway, you got me started ranting.
It's because I brought up the Hunger Games. I seriously could probably do a Hunger Games podcast with you right now, but I don't know.
Everybody's got opinions. Everybody's got Hunger Games opinions.
Tying off of like everything that we were just talking about, and I roughly know the answer to this question, but I like reading through Lumberjanes, and I have to admit I'm 100% I read it in trade. But
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorite parts of the second trade was when Ripley was imbued with all the power, and I think everyone kind of figured that she would do one thing, and she did a completely different thing. She gave Bubbles a funny hat, and she like gave everyone a kitty, and
Mm-hmm.
and then she got rid of the power, and it was like I just thought it was such a great moment because it showed how like every single character in that cast is so hard to pin down as one thing because they're all so wonderfully simple and complex at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, as an editor, how important to you is it to have, positive representation in comics that, not just for women, but for everybody, that makes people, not so easy to define as just one thing, but as everything?
Well, I mean, real people. It's funny because I think, in fact, actually, Lumberjanes, we had to kind of go back and reverse engineer them to be slightly less complex of characters.
Mm-hmm.
Because which is a funny thing to say, I guess. Because they kind of they were all just so good, like, as people, that we had to kind of be like, we need to like figure out like the bad traits of these characters.
Yeah.
So that like stories can happen.
Yeah.
But and like you said, that they feel grounded and weighted and like real people. And, real people aren't just one thing.
Yeah.
As well. And so one of those things where, Grace, who is the one that came up with the initial character descriptions for everyone, that we all kind of built off of, is really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
She's really good at creating characters that are believable and well-rounded and weighty. That's one of her traits.
Mm-hmm.
That is her strongest as a writer. And I think it is important. I mean, it's important to the reader too,
right?
That the character you're reading walks and talks like somebody who they can believe in.
Right.
Even if that is, fantastical and outrageous, they at least need to be grounded in that way,
Right.
You have to believe that it's way less important to explain how they can punch through a wall than it is to know what kind of sandwich they would order at the deli. Frankly, because readers don't really care about about how somebody is able to punch through a wall. They accept that. The rules of the world of fantasy allow for that.
Right.
But they do care if a character who is really scared of water does something water related that without fear or trepidation.
Yeah.
That causes way more stress.
Right.
And that shows you that you've created a successful character. Is when they care about that kind of little stuff, and that's the kind of little stuff that makes us human, and those are the kind of details that I love about people.
I think it's really funny that you said people don't think about superpowers thing, because like when I was reading the second volume, and April just grabs a huge log and to throw it into the water so they can have a bridge during the capture the flag thing. I didn't even think anything of it, but then I was just like, holy crap, she is really strong. And
yeah, it's also strong.
No, I know that, but it was something that it was just kind of an aspect of the character that I just I hadn't even actively thought about. And I know maybe that makes me seem like a really absent-minded reader, but it was just something my comic brain accepted.
No, exactly. It absolutely, and we find it so funny that April is so strong, and it's it's such a delightful part of her personality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as writers and as creators, we love it so much. We love that April is super strong, but you don't you never have to explain it. Why?
What are you gonna say?
Strong. That's just that's the thing, right? There's no reason to explain it. There's no, it doesn't add anything necessarily to the reader's initial understanding of April if you present an origin story, with the first instance of April's super strength. That's something we might explore later, but
yeah.
It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's funny and it's lovely. It's a lovely part that enriches her as a character.
Yeah.
And I think especially beginning writers, young writers, I feel like every detail of their world needs to be explained for their readers. They're not quite to the point where they can trust their readers yet, where they feel like they can trust their readers yet, which is so interesting to me. And it's something, because you don't have to tell the readers every single detail, background. It's much more effective for you to just jump in, start in the middle, and reveal these things as you go along. Once somebody cares about a character, they care a lot more about where they grew up and where they were born, and why they hate this thing and not this thing, because they love them already. It's just like making a friend, You don't, the first time you meet someone, you don't know, why they hate ham sandwiches.
Yeah.
You don't know why. But when somebody you love, when your best friend tells you why they hate ham sandwiches, it's enchanting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could talk all day with my friends about that crap.
Yeah.
I love it. I want to hear all about the ham sandwich.
No, actually, that's funny that you say that, because one of my favorite things, I just find the food that people don't like to be one of the most interesting things, just because I'm I have a friend who doesn't like hash browns or fried chicken at all, but it has nothing to do with them being fried, and she can't explain why. And I just find that to be really fascinating. But anyways, the entirely different tangent. But I totally know what you're saying as far as the explanation stuff too, because there's that one part in the second volume where they're dealing with the velociraptors, and one abducts Ripley, and they're like, no, Ripley, and then she just shows back up later on a raptor riding it, and I'm like, that just makes sense. There's
yeah, right.
And I don't know how, like, there's nothing that you could have explained in between those two moments that would have made it more awesome than her just showing back up riding the raptor.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You
Um,
know, and it's so much more efficient. So much more efficient from a storytelling perspective. It's so much more efficient from a character perspective.
mhm.
You know, to not get bogged down in those kinds of details. Very interesting. Like,
Yeah.
again, it's the character over plot. Again, you know, the character of Ripley explains it. It's like just her, the strength of like what she is as a character explains how she was able to show up on a raptor.
Yeah, absolutely. You've established that she takes care of business, and she took care of business.
Yeah.
So, as an editor, that's one of the things I'm curious about, because you are working with a lot of people who, I'd mentioned like a lot of people that are like haven't really worked in print, like, they've worked on web comics, or somebody like, Lissa Trayman for Giant Days, who I don't believe had really worked on like sequential. I mean, she hadn't worked in like at least print sequential comics before. How much of your job is kind of like, do you have to work in any time to help them like transition into that type of medium or anything like that? Or is it pretty much just same old, same old?
It really depends on the person. Alyssa took to it like fish to water. I find animation people have an incredibly good instinct
Yeah.
for comics. I mean, because especially character. I mean, Alyssa is a character animator.
Yeah.
For the story, storyboard and character. Like she
That
is
makes
incredible
a ton of sense.
with facial expressions
Mhm.
and an incredible storyteller. Like she just intrinsically gets it. There's a great in the kind of the Making of Bone book from a few years back and from way back. There was actually kind of like a Artist Bone book before there was an Artist Bone book. I'm trying to remember what the title is. But it came out in the old trade format that Bone used to be published in, the black and white trade format.
Mhm.
And there's this great thing that really stuck with me, where it's Bone, and Bone is outraged, and he has his finger up in the air, and he's just he's so mad. And in the book, Jeff Smith had blacked him out, like so he was just in silhouette. And you still got the essence of what Bone was feeling. And I find that like it's just like the number one comic principle is like you should be able to look at a character in silhouette and know where they're at.
Yeah.
And know what they're doing. It's always my number one. Like if I don't have any other advice to give in a portfolio review, that's always something that I point out. It's like because if it all else fails, if you're deficient in all other areas, at least the reader can look at your character and know exactly what they're feeling all the time. And animation people are great at that because it's animation principles. That is like it's a very high principle of animation. So yeah, I mean, comics is a language like anything else that you have to learn, and obviously some people need more help than others. But as an editor, I think you're guiding people all the time anyway. You're just prodding people in the right direction all the time anyway. Even people who have years and years and years of experience. So I don't know that it's that different kind of from my everyday to help beginning, people who are just kind of beginning their comics careers.
Sure.
As it would be, helping somebody who's been in the business for a long time.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, especially because a lot of them have, backgrounds that, work into that. And like Alyssa, that makes total sense that she's a character animator, given the fact that like, man, her character work in Giant Days is so good. It just blows my mind. Like, like you could read that
stunning.
book. Yeah, you could read that book with and not to downplay John's writing or anything, but you could read that book with no words and have a pretty good idea as to what's going on throughout the entire story.
That's what's so outrageous about Giant Days, right? Is that John has an impeccable ear for dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I die. I want to be John when I grow up as a writer. I love funny turns of phrases. I love interesting words and interesting turns of phrases.
Mm-hmm.
And John is chock full of them. Like, I love it. It's what drew me to his work in the first place, you
Mm-hmm.
know, as when I was reading like Scary Go Round and Bobbins back in the day, you know, like he has this incredible ear for dialogue. And when it's paired with Lissa or Max, like Max Farron, who took over for Lissa,
Mm-hmm.
when the book went ongoing, Max is also freaking incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Max is insane. Like, I don't know how we struck gold twice.
Yeah.
I can't believe that we struck gold twice. Like, I can't believe it. And so, like, when you have that perfect combo, it's just madness. It's outrageous. I can't believe that I get to edit that book every month, because it is so thoroughly one of my favorite comic books
Right.
out there. Which is something that, you know, I joke a lot about, but it's true. Like, I'm so privileged to be editing and with Lumberjanes too, like writing like my favorite comic. because Lumberjanes is such a team effort, you know, it always is such a surprise when pages come in and they just make you just die laughing. The way that Brooke and Carolyn and now Carrie draw these characters is so funny and delightful, and the way that, you know, all of my cohorts in writing, the way that they'll make the character do something or say something, or even the stuff that like a line that I'll forget that I came up with when it's paired with something that one of the other girls came up with. It's so good and so funny.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm really lucky that the books that I make get to be, you know, some of my favorite books out there, because I don't know that that's the common experience. And so I feel really lucky and really blessed.
I don't think, you know, honestly, I don't really think that is the common experience, but I mean, that's so cool. And like, you know, one thing I think is interesting about Lumberjanes, especially now, because like, I mean, it seems like after it became an ongoing, it became like, you know, the schedule was going to be like too much for like the original crew who was working on it.
Yeah.
And it's been pretty cool seeing like you know, you were saying like you had Carrie like coming in, and like you have Kay co-writing now and everything, and it seems like you guys are kind of rotating people in, but it's cool seeing like on Twitter and stuff, you have like Noelle and everybody else just still like, you know, they still love it. It's still like, you know, a big part of them. And I don't know, like, so is the idea that everyone's just kind of like rotating as part of the team and they just come in as they have time?
Yeah. I mean, the original team, obviously, like, we are involved with everything, but you know, it is really, it's who has the time, and you know, we keep an eye on it to make sure that the voice stays consistent and that, you know, the characters stay consistent and stuff, and so that's, but it is such a part of us, you know. It is an incredibly taxing book, Lumberjanes is, because the team is so big, and you know, so it's a 4-person creative, it's a 4-person creator team, you know. It's Brooke and Grace and Noelle and I, and you know, and 4 people who are family are going to disagree and fight and argue and you know, about what is best for the book, but we always seem to come out on the other side with this beautiful book, this beautiful, enchanting world that we all had a hand in creating, and that's so precious to us. And it doesn't, you know, and it kind of solves all wounds in the end. It's because it's such a beautiful little thing that we made. It's amazing that this beautiful little baby came from us in our brains, like, and you know, and and monthly comics is incredibly taxing, you know, and we had planned on this being an 8-issue jaunt. And so we are, you know, we're doing the best we can, keeping it going. And it's always a pleasure when an issue comes out and people love it just as fervently as they did
when it first
on
started.
day one.
Yeah.
It really, it's like, oh, phew, okay, you know, okay, our stress and our lack of time and our lack of, you know, it hasn't, our baby is still thriving, like we kept it alive. And
Well,
anyway.
uh, I think it's, you know, it's really interesting because it's like I feel like, you know, with the monthly schedule and with, like, you know, the way comics are produced today and stuff, it seems like it's really hard to I mean, obviously it's going to be hard for any book to you know, keep a sustainable creative team, but it seems like kind of like what you guys are doing with Lumberjanes is almost more like, I don't know, it's kind of like almost like a TV writer's room where it's like you guys come up,
Yeah.
yeah, like where you have like the big ideas, and then you kind of like, it's like, you know, for now, like you and Kay are co-writing and Carrie's bringing the art, but it's like everyone's working in the same direction, but sometimes you guys argue about what the details are and stuff.
Exactly. And it was funny because when Grace and I kind of came up with a concept, before anybody else was brought in, we kind of structured it like a television show, like a Saturday morning cartoon show.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of has turned out that way, where it doesn't, you know, everybody throws in, you know. Kat and I had dinner with Noelle when Kat was in town a few weeks ago, or I guess about a month ago. And, you know, Noelle was throwing out ideas at dinner, and Kat was like, yeah, we're doing that, you know. And Noelle's like, I'm like, call me next time you guys are doing a jam because I'm going to be in on it, like, you know. And but it's that kind of thing happens all the time, where it's like, crap, like this person doesn't have time to do this, so what can they do? They can do covers, you know. Brooke doesn't have time to draw this art, that's okay, Brooke's going to do covers for this arc, like, you know. It ends up being okay.
Yeah.
Figure it out, and it manages somehow to continue to have that energy and that joy, because it's bigger than us now. Thank God, you know. Lumberjanes is bigger than us. It's bigger than our little team of 4 weirdos. It's bigger. Thank goodness. Thank goodness it's bigger.
Yeah.
I couldn't be more pleased.
It is, you know, like that's one of the things that's really, I mean, like it sells well, you know, in terms of orders and everything like that. But one of the, like, I talked to a lot of retailers at my site, and both, like, 2 retailers, for example, like Challengers Comics and Conversation in Chicago, and Phantom Comics in Washington D.C. They both said that their top seller in 2014 was actually Lumberjanes #1 out of, like, sell through to, like, to all the people out there. And I just think that's so cool. I mean, it's like you don't see it at the top of the charts and everything like that for, like, diamond order forms and stuff like that, but in terms of what people are actually buying, it's such a sensation.
Which was a surprise and is a pleasure every time. Every time I talk to a retailer, I mean, like, and they have been such gems in pushing and promoting Lumberjanes. I mean, I thanked retailers in my Eisner speech, because it's true. Like, without them, you know, it would not. They have been so supportive, and it's been wonderful. It's been incredible.
So when the Eisner night was over, were you and Noelle just like, what is happening?
Oh yeah, no, we were both drunk and crazy. We were both drunk. Well, literally broke her Eisner because she had all 8 of them in her arms, and she was running around the bar, like, yelling about how she had won an Eisner. And she comes back, she's like, Shannon, I broke one. And I was like, well, that's yours. And she's like, I know.
That's so funny.
She managed to fix it. She managed to give me a fix, but
that's good. I feel like she deserves a badge of some sort for that.
Yeah.
So I just have a few more questions for you. One thing, this is like completely off, or like way off from what we've been talking about, but I think one of the interesting things about the, like, you know, the way the market's shifting is it seems like the trade and book market is, like, more important than pretty much ever. And it seems like for KaBOOM and Boombox, like, at least in my outsider view, it seems like they'd be really important. Have you found those to be, like, I don't know, huge parts of those lines, really?
Yeah, no, they really have been. The book trade has been really great, and it's growing greater for those two lines especially. We've had great scholastic interest and great scholastic orders on books from those two lines. Obviously, that's a huge, delightful boost when that happens. Because of people like Raina and Stacey Bell and and Jeff and the reissues of Bone, like, kids are learning how to read graphic novels. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, those collections have been huge cornerstones for the line.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing I've been really impressed by is like, I don't know. I don't have any kids. I'm technically not a kid, but I'm a huge proponent of all ages comics, and it seems like, while like I guess I have no idea what Lumberjanes or like Giant Days, well, not Giant Days, but like Lumberjanes is like ostensibly rated for kids or anything like that. But it seems like both KaBOOM and Boombox are, doing a lot of all ages comics, and I think that's really fantastic. For you as as an editor and somebody who's cultivating these lines, how important for you is it to develop comics for like the future generations of readers?
Oh gosh, that's my whole deal, man.
Yeah.
That's the whole deal. That's the whole thing. I mean, I make comics. Oh gosh, I've told this story before, but I was on a few years back, and it was like the first year Lumberjanes had become not Lumberjanes, Adventure Time had become a big deal. And so I was on this panel because I was gay. Basically, it was like a politics in comics panel.
Okay.
It wasn't like, I don't know. It was an interesting panel. I was glad that I was on it, but it was funny that I was on it a little bit. And Gail Simone was on it, which was really incredible, and a few other folks. And they asked us like who we made comics for, and everybody had these great high-minded, like, oh, I make comics for everyone. And it came to me, and I and of course, like, I don't say like, oh, I make comics for everyone. And it's true to an extent, but I make comics for 13-year-old girls. That's what I do.
Yeah.
I make comics for 13-year-old girls who want to read, and because that is an honest ambition, everybody can read them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like it comes down to that honesty. It comes down to that, like, that truth. That truth in vision and truth in creative pursuit.
Yeah.
And if you're making something honestly for somebody, then it will translate. It will be for everyone. But yeah, I make comics for 13-year-old girls. That's what I make comics for.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing for me.
No, I think that's fantastic. I think that's I don't know. It's as honorable a pursuit as anything, and I think it, like you said, it's like if you're pursuing like truth and everything, it can be, there's a universality in it. In like I said earlier about Smile, it's like, I mean, not to be a total goober about it, but everybody's got teeth, and it's like everyone's going to be able to relate to that because they've had some sort of experience like that, and it's, I don't know, like, people have been to summer camp. People have, like, the people who've went to college have been to college, and like they'll see something in like Giant Days, and it's just, I don't know, it's very cool seeing something that's like, I've never fought Dr. Doom, but I've definitely done a lot of the things in your books. So the last question I have for you is, like I said at the beginning, you have a lot of hats, Shannon. You have a lot of responsibility at Boom, which I'm sure is awesome, but also occasionally exhausting. How do you balance all of that?
I mean, sometimes not very well. But I'm starting to be a little better at it. I have a really great wife. I have a really cool wife. Her name's Carolyn. She's also an editor. She works for a site called aspirational.com. And she does academic editing for academic presses, and I have really good friends. I'm lucky that, some of my oldest, best, dearest friends live in Los Angeles as well, even though none of us are from Los Angeles. Friends that I've had since I was in middle school or younger that live in Los Angeles, I get to see frequently, and who kind of are my core. I read a lot. I read a lot of things that aren't comics. and that's important.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you keep yourself grounded best you can. I have my closest core group of friends are people that have known me since I was a kid, and since I was a young dummy. And and when somebody knows your history and knows you in that way, and has been through it with you, they have a beautiful ability to keep you from losing too much perspective
Mm-hmm.
in this world of ours. And it's very important to me to have those people in my life. And I also, I don't know, I work at a company where work-life balance is prized and closely guarded. We all work our butts off, but everybody has, the top-ranking people at my company all have families. Our editor-in-chief and our managing editor just have little baby boys.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to make comics that I love.
Yeah.
I get to do that, and it's not to say that there aren't hard days. There are a lot of things in our industry that cause pain and suffering in my heart. There are, a lot of things that I can't solve that I wish that I could
Mm-hmm.
in our, in my day-to-day and in our industry at large. But I get to make comics that I like with people that I like.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a great group of people around me in my life. And so I used to give the answer like, oh, I do a lot of yoga. But I don't know. I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing, and remembering that is the greatest medicine.
Well, Shannon, I'm very much enjoying what you're doing, and I'm happy that at Boom that you have the ability to do so, because like you're producing a lot of great comics. I'm really enjoying the work the lines you're putting together and everything. And thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your.
It absolutely is my pleasure. What a wonderful interview. Thank you for the insightful question.
Oh, absolutely. Well, good luck with everything going forward, and I'll talk to you soon, okay?
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Shannon Watters, on Twitter at @Shanito, that's SHANITO, and co-writing Lumberjanes every month and editing all kinds of books at Boom Studios. You can find more sketch content at sketch.com, that's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at @SketchComic, like us on Facebook at /sketched, and if you're an iTunes listener, give us a rating or review after the show. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.